So for this project, we're going to focus on mainly composition. Composition is a great way to make sure that your project really stands out and that everything comes together. And by having a good composition, it really just makes someone looking at your piece that much more interested to stay focused on your piece because you'll have elements in it like a focal point and ways to draw that attention in towards your project. So having a good composition, again, is really the main piece of a great project. So for this, we're going to have three parts, and the first part I'm going to go over here, but this again is called the layers project since there'll be multiple parts and multiple layers. What I want you to walk away with from this is being able to create a composition that has a clear focal point, the principles of design and elements of art, and then creating an image that has a foreground, middle ground, and background. These three things I expect to see on every project that's done throughout the entire semester. So make sure you're staying focused for this project and really taking away different parts about composition that you can apply in the future that I'll be looking for. We'll also be using found objects for this project. Adding an extra layer to your project, so how to take things a step further, or once you think you're finished, what else can you do to make that project even better. And then we're also really going to discuss and go over how to photograph finished artwork and edit those images in Photoshop so that project by project you're able to have images taken and ready to submit to your portfolio at the end of the year versus taking all of your pictures at the end of the year and taking up a lot of time. So it's a lot easier to just do this as we go, and that way you're able to be submitting things to me online as well through your online portfolios. All right, here's an example of what we're going for. These were some quick examples that I made as I was going through this process and making videos for you guys. So you're going to basically be creating two pieces of artwork. The first one focusing on the rules of composition, and then the second one focusing on elements of art and principles of design, and then the third one we're going to focus on having a foreground, middle ground, and background, and then applying everything to it as well. Taking bits and pieces from your first two and putting them together on the last one. So you can see these triangles were taken from over here, these blue ones from this area, and then they're combined together to create one composition. All right, so for your first artwork, your focus is to have a clear focal point, and then follow these rules of composition, which we will go over in a minute. The first is rule of thirds, leading line, framing, lead space. And then you need to use at least two different creative found objects. So that could be like what I have in mind, tinfoil and construction paper. And then it could be just anything that you find laying around your house, whether it's inside, outside. Be creative. What can you use to really put together an interesting first project? And remember that whatever you put together on this will be used for your last one. All right, so I want to talk about these compositional rules that we'll be focusing on. The first most important compositional rule that should be in every project that you ever create is a focal point. This is the area of the artwork where the viewer's eye is naturally drawn. So when you look at this picture of the fish, your eye should naturally be drawn to that orange fish. Even though it's smaller than the rest, since it's a different color, it's facing a different direction, it's a different shape, different size, that's what's drawing your attention to it. Without a focal point, your piece could lose impact and the viewer will not have somewhere to focus. So without that orange fish in the image, everything's the same. So just glancing at it, your eye naturally doesn't have an area to rest and then to observe what else is going on. So the viewer's just going to look at it and move on to another picture because there's not that one spot to focus on. So always create one area to really focus on. So on the left image here, you can really see that flower that stands out. And I would say even the center part of the flower, since it's this main kind of bright yellow area. So this focal point is being created because it fills the frame. It's a bigger size, so your focus is drawn automatically to it. It's a different color than the background. And then in this picture here, there's a lot of shapes, a lot of designs going on. There's additional compositional rules that are helping the focal point stand out. But in this image, the focal point would be this blue circle here. And that's just where the eye naturally goes to in the image because there's all these lines and different things kind of converging in towards that focal point. So always have a focus in your artwork. And that brings me to the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is where to put your focal point in your piece of art. With the rule of thirds, you're basically breaking up your composition or your artwork into a tic-tac-toe grid. So you're breaking it up into these 3 sections. And then you want your artwork or the focal point to fall on one of these lines, whether it's the vertical or the horizontal line. So in this example, you have the lighthouse that lines up with that vertical line there. The lighthouse obviously stands out as the main focus of the image. It's a different color, it's a lot bigger than the background, and that just really draws your eye to it. You can break the rule of thirds. You can still have a focal point in the center of your image, as long as you're still following other rules to make it stand out. But I would highly suggest every composition, just move that focal point off to the side and try to follow the rule of thirds. That way when someone looks at your image, they first of all go right to the focal point, and then they have that area in the background for their eye to kind of follow along and flow through, versus just seeing the focal point right away and moving on because they already saw the main piece of the image. So focal point, and then you want the eye to kind of continue, and just like you're reading a book, you want someone to read the rest of your image and see what else is going on. So try to take your focal point and move it off to either side. Here's another example. So we have the person as our focal point that's off to the side. And then this is kind of a way to show you how you read that image like a book, what I was talking about. So you start with the focal point, and then you're drawn in towards the castle, and then you're drawn in towards the dragon in the background here as well. So your eye is just naturally following that background. So it gives you a lot more kind of space to draw the viewer and keep them focused on your artwork longer. You want them to be focused and looking at everything that's going on as long as you can. Here's another example of something that's a little more abstract, which definitely still works. You can still have a clear focal point and follow rules of composition in an abstract painting. But here's our focal point, so where these 2 lines intersect. So it follows the rule of thirds, and your focus is still drawn there, but then you're able to see everything else going on in the composition too. All right, so that leads us to the next rule of composition that I want to see in these projects, which is leading line. And I would highly recommend using leading line in most of your other projects too. It's a great way to kind of act as an arrow leading the viewer's eye towards your focal point. So we have these 2 people here that are the focal point, and then they're off to the side, so they're also following the rule of thirds. But there's lots of lines that are helping to point towards that focal point. So it's helping to bring the focus from the background, from the dolphin or whale there, and then into the focal point. So you can see that this line of the railing comes in from the outside and lines up with our focal point. And then the whale is kind of pointing towards the people as well, so that could count as a line. You've got these lines from the building in the background going towards the people, and then these kind of abstract designs as well that are pointing towards the focal point. So leading line could be really anything in your artwork. Here's an example of a photograph with leading line, where you have the line where the sidewalk and then the grass meet and connect, and that creates a line pointing right towards our focal point. And then here's another example. We've got leading line that was this line created on top of the image. So it could be something where you feel like you followed the rule of thirds, you have a creative image, but it still is kind of missing something. Maybe from there you could create some kind of line design in the background, or like what they did here, had some line that's transparent coming over top of our focal point. All right, the next one is framing. And this one is great because it really, again, emphasizes that focal point. So we have the house that's the focal point. It's on that upper horizontal tic-tac-toe line, so it's off to the side, even though it's not off to the side on the left or the right, it still is up a little bit there, off center. And then this fence is wrapping around our focal point, framing it. So here's another example of framing that's not as straightforward, but it could be through your value change. So there's this darker value around the eye that's framing it. So instead of having those bright colors all the way around, by putting that darker shadow around the eye, it really draws your focus in and helps to frame the focal point. So think of it just like a picture frame. You want to help to get rid of the distractions on the outside and bring the focus in on your focal point. And here's another great example where you have that bridge that wraps around the two people here that are the focus of the image. And then another abstract painting example is a great way to see the use of framing in a different way. But we have the frame with that yellow circle, which really creates our focal point. Without this yellow circle, there'd be a lot going on and you'd get kind of lost in the design. So it helps to bring that focus in. All right, lead space is pretty easy, but it's just leaving space in the direction that an object is moving or looking. So you have that space off to the right of the car because the car is moving in that direction there. So you're just, again, leaving space so your composition doesn't feel cut off. So if you had this image cut off on the right, you wouldn't have that area for the viewer to kind of look and see what else is going on and where that person is looking. And then here's another example. So they left space to the right of the person. And then I also wanted to show an example of a painting or something without a person or object. So the focal point's off to the right side, but the lines are moving out towards the left where there's that extra space. So they left space off to the left side there. All right, and the last example, same thing. I wanted to show another abstract piece, but you can see that the focal point is off to the left side because that white really is contrasted and stands out the most. But instead of having these lines going off to the left where it would get cut off, you have these lines coming off of our focal point moving out towards the right where all of that space is. So that's all the compositional rules that I want you to include in this first project. There's a lot more, but I think these are the main ones that I want you to focus on this year. You can definitely research and look into using more, but I think these are the main ones that will really help that focal point to stand out that I want you to try to use on really all of your projects in the future, but mainly start with this first one and this first design focused on these rules. So go ahead and watch the video that I made that shows a time lapse of me creating this first project, and I'm explaining my thought process about how I'm incorporating those rules of composition as well.